What if you could help others to find the power to heal themselves, physically, emotionally, and spiritually?
When I started teaching my classes, it was in 2002, and I was just doing past life regressions and contacting the subconscious part. But then as the time went on and we found how powerful this was and what we could do with it, a lot of the students began saying, you know, advanced past life regression doesn't really tell what it's all about. This is so much more than that. We think you should change the name. So it was a few years ago, we decided to change the name to Quantum Healing Hypnosis Technique.
Help other people to speak to their higher selves. You can. Dolores Cannon has taught thousands of people from across the world how to use QHHT. Now you can learn her method by going directly to themoreshow.com/QHHT. And don't forget to mention the discount coupon MORETALKS. My guest now is Ian R. Crane, who is an ex-oilfield executive. Ian now lectures and writes on the geopolitical issues. He joins us now to discuss his work and in particular the BP oil disaster. Ian R. Crane, welcome to the show.
Thank you, Kevin.
So Ian, just for our audience to begin with, tell us very briefly about yourself.
20 years in the oil industry. I came out of the oil industry in 1998. Went back into the corporate arena briefly for 18 months. But then I decided to pursue my first interest, which was mythology and the ancient wisdom of indigenous peoples, and also deep geopolitics. And I mean, the two are actually remarkably inextricably interlinked.
Right, and what is deep geopolitics? Just for
deep
our audience?
Geopolitics is looking at the deep global agenda. The vast majority of people, unfortunately, are kept into very short time perspectives. You know, maybe you know the next reality show or maybe the next salary check. But for the vast majority of people, you know, they're really not looking very far in advance. But those who are, shall I say, manipulating the global agenda work to multi-generational timescales. You know, it's 50, 100, 200, 500 years. And this is sort of outside of most people's bounds of perception, but it's a truly fascinating subject.
So you're saying there's a much bigger picture going on here as far as you're concerned?
Most definitely. And It's like all games. You know, when you know the rules of the game, you can predict the moves of your opponents, if you like.
So what sparked your interest in all this? You was an oil field executive. What changed your mind that there was more going on in the world than met the eye?
I can absolutely pinpoint that as late March 1991, I was one of the first civilians to go into Kuwait at the end of the first Gulf War. And I was 34 years of age at the time. And up until that point, Kevin, I had absolutely no reason to question orthodox reality. But my literal first-hand experience changed that. Not overnight, it took a long time to integrate the experience. But basically what I witnessed in Kuwait, as far as I'm concerned, called into question the official version of events regarding the Kuwait oil fires. Because, of course, the official version of events is that the 600-odd well fires in Kuwait in 1991 were set alight by the retreating Iraqi troops. The physical evidence that I saw firsthand did not support that proposition. And I was driving around with a military driver in the southern oil fields. I was looking at the logistics of what we were going to need to be doing in terms of the oil industry putting the fires out. And I made the observation that it looked to me very much like the wells had actually been set alight by special forces. And the physical evidence was the dead Iraqi troops still in defensive positions around the burning wells. Well, my military driver didn't say very much, but 2 days later, I was visited while I was having dinner in the mess of the Kuwaiti oil company in Ahmadi. And this guy in military fatigues, made a beeline for me and basically told me to keep my mouth shut, and effectively threatened me that there might be some serious consequences if I didn't. Now, it took me 5 years to really comprehend what I'd witnessed and to understand it and put it into some kind of perspective. And it was by 1996, when I was actually based in the US, I was based in Houston, Texas. And that was when I started to spend a lot more time researching the deeper agenda. And of course, what I uncovered really set me down this particular path.
So one of the big sort of events 10 years ago, one of the bigger major events was obviously 9/11. And I know you've looked into this as well. What's your connections with 9/11 and what have you looked at?
Well, with 9/11, in fact, whilst I wouldn't say that I predicted the precise event, I was actually researching Mayan mythology and cosmology in the 6 months prior to 9/11. I was based in Belize, but traveling around Central America. And in addition to that, I was still researching the deep geopolitical agenda. And it became very apparent that in those first few months of the George W. Bush administration, that he was effectively biding his time. I mean, he spent most of his time on his ranch in Crawford, Texas, and not really doing very much at all. And it was quite apparent that he was effectively biding his time, waiting for some major event to launch him onto the world stage. But the evidence to support that hypothesis was there's numerous aspects, but two aspects I'll quote. A book written by Zbigniew Brzezinski in 1997 called The Grand Chessboard. And in that book, Brzezinski actually made the observation that 8 years after the fall of the Soviet Empire, America was actually missing the opportunity under the Clinton administration. It was missing the opportunity to establish its global dominance as the only remaining superpower on the planet. And he actually made the observation that he understood that whilst it was important, in his opinion, for America to establish its global dominance, that the American people wouldn't do that because the American people had no stomach for another sort of military exercise or expedition, especially after Vietnam.
Of course.
Even though the Gulf War was a sort of relative success in the scheme of things. But Brzezinski made the observation that basically America would need a catastrophic event to be effectively under direct attack. And then the people would support that agenda.
So had 9/11 not happened, the world would be a completely different place, wouldn't it?
Most definitely. Well, 3 years after Brzezinski published The Grand Chessboard, this document that I have here, which is called Rebuilding America's Defenses. And this was published by a group who call themselves the Project for a New American Century, the PNAC. It's freely available on the web from the PNAC website. And this is a document that effectively takes Brzezinski's work in The Grand Chessboard and turns it into a policy document. And it's looking to establish American foreign policy. Now, at the time it was published, Clinton was still in the White House. But in this document, what is very interesting is that on page 51, and it's almost not word for word, but it's lifted effectively from Brzezinski's Grand Chessboard. And on page 51, it's a very similar observation. It says, further, the process of transformation, i.e. America becoming the dominant global power, even if it brings revolutionary change, is likely to be a long one, absent some catastrophic and catalyzing event like a new Pearl Harbor. And of course, George W. Bush famously and reportedly wrote in his diary on the evening of 9/11, today we got our new Pearl Harbor. Well, if you actually read this document without knowing who wrote it, you would think that this is just the work of some science fiction fantasist like George Orwell on acid or whatever. But when you actually get to the project participants, first of all, one of the names that we see here is Paul Wolfowitz, who of course was Donald Rumsfeld's Undersecretary for Defense. He eventually became head of the World Bank. And also Dov Zakheim, who was also working with Donald Rumsfeld in the George Bush administration as comptroller for the Pentagon. And it was Dov Zakheim who, on September the 10th, 2011, announced to the world media that the Pentagon could not account for $2.3 trillion.
That's right, and that was hidden just after the well, not hidden, it was announced just prior to 9/11 happening, wasn't it?
Of course.
I remember that. So surely if America's involved with this, then other countries must be as well. Are you saying there's a bit of a cover-up going on here then?
Well, what I'm saying is that there is a deep geopolitical agenda. There is effectively a cabal. It is a group who they're internationalists, they're globalists, and they believe that they are the rightful rulers of a planetary fiefdom. And we hear a lot mentioned about a new world order. Well, in reality, what is in the process of being established right now is a global corporation. And in fact, we have many documents. These are freely available documents, but the vast majority of people, of course, elect not to even look for them. Maybe they just don't have the inclination, even if they have the time. Or if they have the inclination, they don't have the time, But this information is out there. It's freely available for people. And there's a document called Global Governance 2025, which was funded by the Rockefeller Institute, which explains even in greater detail, the proposition to establish this global corporation to eradicate nation states and effectively establish divisions of the corporation around the planet.
So you call these events false flag operations. And just very briefly, just again, what is a false flag operation?
Well, a false flag operation is basically a staged event which you blame on somebody else to further your own agenda. So, for example, 9/11, and as Richard was explaining, there are many, many, many anomalies. The bottom line is you actually have to suspend your knowledge of reductionist Newtonian physics to believe the official version of events. But what was the purpose of the event? Well, that was spelled out for us by Zbigniew Brzezinski and the authors of the PNAC document, Rebuilding America's Defenses, because what it did was it created this fervor, this aggressive fervor amongst the American people to launch, first of all, an aggressive war on Afghanistan, just 6 weeks after the events of 9/11, all on the supposed principle that the Afghanistan government was housing or hiding Osama bin Laden. Then, of course, we have an aggressive war on Iraq, launched on March the 20th, 2003, supposedly because Saddam Hussein has accumulated weapons of mass destruction. The reality is that it was later admitted by a number of members of the George W. Bush administration that the only reason they put that information out was because they thought it was the only one that the public would actually buy into and give them the opportunity to launch this attack. Now, what we know is, of course, that millions of people all around the world hit the streets to protest against the launch of this illegal war, which is why actually these guys have improved their template, and what they have launched in Libya, ironically, on March the 20th of 2011.
10 years on as well, or more.
8 years on.
Yeah.
2003, 2011, exactly 8 years, same date,
I
March
meant
20th.
10 years on from 2001.
Oh, 10 years on 2001, indeed. But effectively, it's the same deal. The difference here is that what they did was they created this perception of the Arab Spring, and so that when Libya fell, it just looked like the next domino. But in reality, Libya was the target all along, for exactly the same reason that Iraq was the target in 2003. Because just the same as Saddam Hussein was selling his oil, his limited oil, in the oil for food program in euros, thereby undermining the petrodollar, Gaddafi was doing pretty much the same and was in the process of establishing a market for Libyan oil in gold.
Why is there a false flag event happening, in your opinion, to Libya as we speak very briefly before the break?
The global corporatists, those who wish to establish the global corporation, want to have total control of the planetary resources. And Libya is not an insignificant contributor to the global oil production. It has tremendous reserves. It has certainly 60 plus years of reserves at the current rate of production. It's a light, sweet crude. It pumps out under natural pressure. The costs of production are barely $1 a barrel. So the margins are phenomenal. And Gaddafi was on the brink of launching an oil market in gold dinar, the Libyan dinar. And his game plan was to effectively establish an Arab-African union built on the gold dinar.
Right, well, we'll come back to that after the break, because there's so much more to talk about. So stay tuned, and I'll see you after the break.
You're on a journey right now, a destination where you are headed full of adventure. And all around you are clues pointing you in the direction of your higher purpose and dreams. The signs and synchronicities can be seen. Whilst on a trip, at your local coffee shop, within your social networks. The road to your success and happiness is scattered throughout the pictures of our days. Simply make the connection, that's all. Channeling.com is your source for highly regarded spiritual readers who can direct you on your journey. Use the code TMS1 to receive a discount on your first reading.
Welcome back, and I'm joined here by Ian R. Crane. So Ian, welcome back to the show. Now Ian, just we were talking there about the Middle East uprising, and of course Libya in no uncertain terms there has been affected. But obviously this is spread to Syria now as well. I mean, is that part of their agenda?
Absolutely. I mean, it's going to be spread, of course, right across the Middle East. I mean, Yemen, Syria, been through Egypt. The nature of the game here is to effectively establish puppet regimes within the entire Middle East region. I mean, let's not forget that the Libyan rebels had already had discussions with the Rothschilds prior to the uprising started, so that Libya, when they remove Gaddafi, has a Rothschilds bank. Because the one thing that we have to acknowledge, this is no conspiracy, this is straightforward fact, is that the countries that are labeled in the Western media as the axis of evil, countries like Chavez's Venezuela, Castro's Cuba, formerly Iraq, Libya, Iran, North Korea, these countries all have one thing in common, and that is that they are free of debt from the World Bank. They have remained out of the financial clutches of the World Bank and obviously the IMF. And they manage their own economy. And this goes against the grain of the global corporatists.
And Libya was giving money back to its people. Wasn't it up to them when they worked as well?
Well, it was basically what was happening. And the same happens in Iran, by the way, is that Gaddafi actually paid the people effectively a dividend. And they received this dividend on a monthly basis. And then, obviously, then they would work, if they wished to work, beyond that. But the reality was that, it was effectively a society that was very different from anything that we comprehend in the West. In fact, let me tell you that on January the 4th of this year, 2001, the UN was about to release a report which actually praised Gaddafi as a model leader of the Arab African world.
So what changed him to become such a monster as the media's?
He's not a monster. I mean, let's understand that the role of the mainstream media in the West is to control the narrative. The role of the media here is to tell the people what to think. And I'll give you a classic example. Just a few days ago, it was reported in one of the red top papers in the UK that Gaddafi had been buying up large quantities of Viagra, which he was giving to his troops, so they then go out and rape the women.
I saw the story, yeah.
I mean, this is in the same league as the reports that Iraqi troops were going into the Kuwaiti hospitals and throwing babies out of incubators. There is no truth in these stories whatsoever. I mean, it's often said that the first casualty of war is truth, and this is a classic example. And the West is putting out propaganda to demonize Gaddafi, just like it was demonizing Saddam, both in the immediate aftermath of the first Gulf War and, of course, prior to 2003. And now we've got the same thing going on with Libya. And it's really important that people actually start to practice discretion and discernment.
Yeah. Well, talking about cover-ups, now some of your work that you've extensively lectured on is the BP oil spill. So is there something more sinister about that? Why have we heard no more in the mainstream media?
Oh, I certainly believe that there is something more sinister than this. I mean, first of all, Kevin, I think it's important to make the observation. I actually put out a newsletter on April the 19th of 2010. I was actually holed up in a hotel in Lisbon because I couldn't fly back to London because of a volcanic ash cloud that was supposedly covering the skies. I'm sure many of your viewers will remember that because it was the time when we had the clearest blue skies we've probably seen in a long time. But I had this real strong sense of foreboding that something really significant was about to happen. And I don't claim any unique or special insights here. I just know the script. April the 19th is a very, very significant day in the belief system of those who believe that they are the rightful rulers of a planetary fiefdom. April the 19th, 1993, was the day of the attack on the Waco complex in Texas. At least 72 people were killed, many of them young children, because of the firestorm that was unleashed on the complex by the Alcohol, Tobacco and Firearms Division of the FBI. 2 years later, we had the lone gunman attack on the Alfred P. Murrah building in Oklahoma City by Timothy McVeigh. Once again, it was supposedly a revenge attack for Waco and against the ATF, but nobody from the ATF was actually in their offices that morning. And when the bomb exploded, the vast majority of people that were killed in the Alfred P. Murrah building were young children who'd been dropped off at the nursery that was on the first floor. April the 20th of 1999 was the day of the Columbine High School massacre. April the 19th, 20th, all the way through history, seems to be very significant for some reason.
Symbolic dates, you mean? Maybe?
It's symbolic dates, yes. It's a day of sacrifice by fire. And on 2010, I had a real sense of foreboding that something was about to be unleashed the following day. So my newsletter went out at midnight on April the 19th from Lisbon. And of course, it was 2 days later, it was actually April 21st in Europe, when we learned about the Deepwater Horizon disaster. And initially, although I had a lot of emails from people saying, Ian, is this the event you've been writing about? And initially, I didn't want to think that it was because I have 20 years in the oil industry with a company called Schlumberger, who, by the way, played a very, very significant role on the Deepwater Horizon, and I hope we have time to cover that.
Well, yeah, I just want to, let's get, what is the point of the oil spill then in the Gulf?
To poison the Gulf, basically. I mean, what we are seeing right now is effectively the whole of the southeastern United States is in the process of being made uninhabitable. It's depopulation. These guys, the global corporatists, have spelt out, literally in tablets of stone, and I refer to the Georgia Guidestones. I encourage people to Google the Georgia Guidestones for themselves. The Georgia Guidestones were erected in Elbert County, Georgia in 1982. And in 8 modern languages and 8 ancient languages are the goals and objectives of those who believe themselves to be the rightful rulers of the planet. And number 1 is to reduce humanity under 500 million. And basically, they are launching a series of supposedly disconnected events, which, along with a much deeper ongoing agenda, such as genetically modified foods, such as vaccinations, such as bisphenol A, which is in the cans and plastic bottles that we use, which is all contributing to reducing fertility. The birth rate is actually falling. It's a myth that the population is exploding on the planet. The birth rate is falling. And yesterday I gave a presentation called Making Sickness Compulsory, where I showed the prima facie evidence using UN statistics that shows that these guys are well on track to have the population below 2 billion people by the year 2136.
For what purpose? I mean,
because within their global corporation, 7 billion people is too many employees. And they become, as Henry Kissinger famously described them, useless eaters.
So not enough product to go around for everyone, basically.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And so these people would be a drain on society. Now, Kevin, one of the things that is coming, and is coming very fast, and I've been talking about this now for 18 months, is within the next few months, I mean, we're already well down the road in terms of the global financial meltdown. But the end game for that hasn't been played out yet. We're also in the advanced stages of a global food shortage. I mean, people are already experiencing rising prices in foods. Russia announced in 2010 that it would not be exporting any grain in 2010, 11, or 12. So I've been encouraging people for the last 18 months to think very carefully about how they would actually manage for themselves and their families a situation where maybe there is a very serious food shortage, perhaps as soon as this coming autumn. But just to go back to the BP thing, because one thing I think is very, very important, I produced a DVD of a presentation I gave in July of 2010. And in that presentation, I have named the individual that was put on the rig, that was actually placed on the Deepwater Horizon to make this happen.
But just very briefly then, why the Gulf of Mexico? Why destroy this rig?
Because the Gulf of Mexico is a feed source for the Gulf Stream, for both the seaborne and the airborne Gulf Stream. Now, what's very interesting is that, this is not just an oil spill.
So for the ecosystem as well, yeah?
Absolutely. For the global ecosystem. But in addition to the oil has been mixed with a dispersant called Corexit, which is an extremely toxic chemical. In fact, it's banned almost everywhere else in the world. But BP pumped, at a conservative estimate, well over 1 million gallons of this Corexit into the slick. And the purpose of that was to sink the slick, to take it away from the surface.
Where's it going to end up?
Well, it's ending up on the bottom of the Gulf in a mat, which is creating a dead zone. But Kevin, in addition to the Corexit, what has also been added to the oil Corexit mix, and we have this admission from BP. The admission was made by BP's Chief Operations Officer, a guy called Mike Utzler, in an interview with the BBC. And in that interview, he stated categorically that BP had introduced genetically modified microbiology to help with the cleanup process. Now, what is happening in the Gulf of Mexico right now, there are thousands of people that are experiencing extreme levels of health problems. Breathing difficulties are very common all around the Gulf Coast region.
So where can people find out more information about your work then?
In my work, well, they can Google Ian R. Crane, or go to my website, ianrcrane.co.uk. And as you rightly said, Kevin, I spend a lot of time giving public presentations. And let me reiterate, I do not expect anybody to take anything I say at face value. In fact, I'd be mortified if they did. My purpose is simply to encourage people not to accept the official version of events at face value and to go and research for themselves and then come to their own realization or determination of what's actually occurring.
Well, Ian, thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you, Kevin.
For more information on any of my guests, and including Ian Crane and Richard R. Gage, go to my website, themoreshow.co.uk, and click on Past Guests. And you can also follow us on Twitter and Facebook to get the latest updates on the show. So until next time, thanks for watching.